Rome had survived Pyrrhus, but its worst enemy was still coming. Hannibal would cross the Alps, crush Roman armies, and bring Rome closer to destruction than ever before. Alright, so, Rome had just survived one of the hardest wars of its early history. It had fought Pyrrhus. It had faced Greek soldiers. It had faced war elephants. And even after losing major battles, Rome kept coming back. That was the scary thing about Rome. You could beat its army, but beating Rome was something else. But now Rome was facing a completely different enemy. Carthage. Carthage was a rich and powerful city in North Africa. It had a huge trading network. It had a strong navy. It had money. And it had access to soldiers from many different lands. Rome and Carthage had already fought once. That first war had lasted more than 20 years. Rome eventually won. But Carthage did not disappear. It rebuilt. It expanded into Spain. And that is where a young Carthaginian commander started building something that would terrify Rome. His name was Hannibal Barca. Look, Hannibal was not just another general. From a young age, he grew up around war. His father, Hannibal Barca, had fought Rome during the First Punic War. After Carthage lost, Hannibal went to Spain and began building Carthaginian power there. Hannibal eventually followed him into that world. He learned how armies worked. He learned how different peoples fought. And he learned something very important. Rome could be beaten. That idea would shape everything that came next. Hannibal became commander of Carthaginian forces in Spain while still a young man. He expanded Carthaginian control. He built relationships with local groups. He gathered experienced soldiers. And slowly, he created an army that was not made up of just one kind of fighter. He had soldiers from North Africa. He had Spanish troops. He had cavalry. He had later support from Gallic warriors. And he had commanders who knew how to fight in different ways. That mix would become one of his biggest strengths. But Hannibal also knew that fighting Rome and Spain was not enough. Rome had a massive advantage. Italy. Rome could raise armies from its Italian allies again and again. So if Hannibal wanted to seriously hurt Rome, he needed to bring the war to Rome's own backyard. And that meant doing something almost unbelievable. He planned to march from Spain. Through Gaul. Across the Alps. And into Italy. Yeah. Think about that for a second. He was not taking the easy road. He was not simply loading his army onto ships and sailing toward Rome. The Mediterranean was dangerous. Rome had a powerful navy. So Hannibal chose land. A massive army. Hundreds of miles. Rivers. Mountains. Enemy tribes. Cold weather. And the Alps. It sounded almost impossible. Then Hannibal gave Rome the excuse it needed to declare war. The city of Saguntum in Spain had close ties with Rome. Hannibal attacked it. The siege lasted for months. Eventually, Saguntum fell. Rome demanded that Carthage hand Hannibal over. Carthage refused. And in 218 BC, the Second Punic War began. This was no small fight. This was going to decide which power would dominate the Western Mediterranean. And Hannibal had already made his choice. He was going straight for Italy. Alright, so, Hannibal began moving his army north. He crossed rivers. He fought local groups. Some people joined him. Some fought him. And some simply wanted to survive. Hannibal had to keep his army moving while also keeping it fed. That alone was a huge challenge. An army is not just soldiers. It needs food. It needs animals. It needs weapons. It needs supplies. And the larger the army gets, the harder everything becomes. But Hannibal kept going. Eventually, he reached the Alps. And this is where the journey became brutal. The Alps were not some easy road through the mountains. The paths were dangerous. The weather could turn quickly. The army had to move through narrow routes. Men and animals could fall. Local groups could attack. And Hannibal's soldiers had already traveled a huge distance. Still, they crossed. The exact route Hannibal used is still debated. But the important part is simple. He got across. And when Hannibal finally came down into northern Italy, Rome was shocked. The Romans had expected the war to be fought somewhere else. Now an enemy army was standing inside Italy. And it was not a small force. Hannibal had brought a large group of experienced soldiers with him, even though the army had suffered heavy losses during the journey. He also gained new support from Gallic groups in northern Italy. That gave his army fresh strength. And Rome suddenly had a serious problem. Its enemy was inside Italy. Okay, so, Rome reacted quickly. Roman forces moved north. The first clashes showed something important. Hannibal had excellent cavalry. His horsemen could move quickly. They could attack Roman troops from the sides. They could chase soldiers who tried to escape. And Hannibal knew how to use them. At the Battle of Ticinus, Roman forces were pushed back. It was not yet the disaster Rome feared. But it was a warning. Hannibal was dangerous. Then came the Battle of the Trebia. And this time, Rome was about to learn a much harder lesson. Hannibal understood the Roman commanders. He knew they wanted to attack. So he prepared a trap. The Roman army crossed cold water. The soldiers were tired. They were hungry. And they were facing a well-prepared enemy. Hannibal's troops attacked. The fighting became intense. Then hidden troops struck the Romans from behind. The Roman army was trapped. Some soldiers managed to escape. Many did not. Hannibal had won again. And now Rome had lost two important battles. But do not let that fool you. Rome was not finished. Not even close. That is the part people sometimes miss when they tell this story. Hannibal was winning battles. But Rome was fighting a much bigger war. Rome had allies. Rome had cities. Rome had manpower. Rome had money. And Rome had something Hannibal could not easily destroy. Time. Rome could afford to wait. Hannibal could not. Alright, so, Hannibal kept moving. He needed the Italian allies of Rome to turn against Rome. That was one of the biggest parts of his plan. If Rome's allies started leaving, Rome's military system could begin falling apart. And for a while, it looked like that might happen. Hannibal moved south. The Romans sent another army after him. And Hannibal understood something about the land. He knew where the Romans would probably move. He found a route near Lake Trasimene. The Romans marched forward. They did not realize they were walking into a trap. Hannibal had placed his troops around the area. The Romans were suddenly attacked from several directions. There was confusion everywhere. The Romans had little room to organize. Many soldiers were killed. Others were forced toward the lake. It became one of the worst Roman defeats of the war. And once again, Hannibal had destroyed a Roman army. 3 major victories. Ticinus. Trebia. Lake Trasimene. Rome was starting to panic. Imagine hearing that another Roman army had been destroyed. Then another. Then another. And the enemy commander was still moving around Italy. It must have been terrifying. But Rome did something smart. Instead of sending another army straight into Hannibal's trap, Rome changed its strategy. A Roman leader named Fabius Maximus became extremely important. His idea was simple. Do not give Hannibal the battle he wants. That sounds boring. But it was actually brilliant. Fabius avoided a huge direct fight. He followed Hannibal. He attacked small groups. He threatened supplies. He watched. He waited. And he tried to wear Hannibal down. Hannibal hated this. Because Hannibal was strongest when he could choose the battlefield. He was strongest when he could study the enemy. He was strongest when he could create a trap. Fabius was basically saying, "No. You're not getting that chance." And Rome needed patience. But patience is hard. Especially after losing battle after battle. Many Romans wanted a huge victory. They wanted Hannibal destroyed. They wanted revenge. And eventually, Rome decided to send an enormous army against him. This brings us to Cannae. And honestly, Cannae is where this story gets insane. In 216 BC, Rome gathered one of the largest armies it had ever put into the field. The goal was simple. Find Hannibal. Fight him. Destroy him. End the war. But Hannibal was ready. He chose the battlefield carefully. He studied the Roman army. He knew the Romans had more soldiers. That could have scared him. Instead, he used their numbers against them. The Romans pushed forward. Their center attacked. Hannibal's weaker center slowly gave ground. At first, it looked like the Romans were winning. They pushed deeper. And deeper. And deeper. But that was exactly what Hannibal wanted. His center curved backward. His stronger troops on the sides held their positions. Then his cavalry attacked from the outside. And suddenly, the Romans were surrounded. Think about that. Thousands and thousands of Roman soldiers were packed into a battlefield with nowhere to move. Their own numbers became a problem. They could not easily turn. They could not easily escape. Hannibal's soldiers attacked from multiple directions. The Roman army was crushed. Cannae became one of the most famous military victories in ancient history. And Rome had suffered a disaster. Again. But here is the crazy part. Rome still did not surrender. This is what makes Hannibal's story so powerful. He had crossed the Alps. He had beaten Roman armies. He had destroyed one of the largest Roman armies ever assembled. And yet Rome was still standing. After Cannae, some of Rome's allies did leave. Capua, one of the biggest cities in Italy, joined Hannibal. Other communities switched sides. Hannibal's position became stronger. For a moment, it looked like Rome might actually collapse. But not everyone left. Many Italian communities stayed loyal to Rome. Roman colonies continued to hold important positions. And Rome itself refused to give up. The Senate kept raising armies. Even after huge losses. Even after Cannae. Rome kept fighting. That was the moment when Hannibal faced his biggest enemy. Not a Roman general. Not a Roman army. The Roman system itself. Okay, so, after Cannae, people have often asked one huge question. Why didn't Hannibal simply march straight to Rome? The answer is more complicated than people think. Hannibal had won an incredible battle. But taking Rome was a completely different job. A battlefield victory and a city siege are not the same thing. Rome had strong defenses. Hannibal did not have everything he needed for a long siege. He also needed supplies. He needed reinforcements. He needed more support from Carthage. And he needed more Italian cities to join him. Without those things, attacking Rome directly was extremely risky. So Hannibal continued his campaign. He wanted to weaken Rome's alliance system. He wanted more cities. He wanted more support. And he hoped Carthage would send him the resources he needed. But Carthage did not give Hannibal everything he needed. That became one of the biggest problems of the war. Hannibal was fighting thousands of miles away from his homeland. Rome was fighting in Italy. Rome could raise new armies in Italy. Hannibal had to rely on a mixture of local support, reinforcements, and supplies from Carthage. That difference mattered a lot. Real talk, this is where the war became a battle of endurance. Hannibal had already shown that he could destroy Roman armies. But Rome was changing. Roman commanders were becoming more careful. They stopped giving Hannibal easy victories. They attacked cities. They took back allies. They cut off supplies. They slowly pushed Carthaginian power backward. And while Hannibal was fighting in Italy, another Roman commander was becoming very important. His name was Publius Cornelius Scipio. Later, he would become known as Scipio Africanus. And he understood something that could change the entire war. If Hannibal would not leave Italy, Rome could take the war to Carthage. That was a huge idea. Instead of chasing Hannibal around Italy forever, Scipio wanted to attack Carthage itself. But first, Rome needed to win in Spain. Spain was important because it supplied Carthage with soldiers and money. If Rome could take Carthaginian territory there, Hannibal would have a harder time getting help. Scipio moved into Spain. And he proved to be a very smart commander. He attacked Carthaginian positions. He captured important cities. He defeated Carthaginian armies. And slowly, Roman control in Spain grew. This was a major problem for Hannibal. His family had built Carthaginian power in Spain. Now Rome was tearing it apart. Then came another major moment. Hannibal's brother, Hasdrubal, tried to bring reinforcements into Italy. He wanted to join Hannibal. If the two brothers could combine their armies, Rome could face a much bigger threat. Hasdrubal marched into Italy. Rome realized what was happening. The Romans moved quickly. They intercepted him at the Natioryx river. And Hasdrubal was defeated. His army was destroyed. He was killed. And Hannibal never got the reinforcement he desperately needed. That was a huge turning point. Hannibal was still in Italy. But now the hope of a major Carthaginian buildup was fading. Rome was slowly tightening the pressure. And Scipio was preparing for something even bigger. Africa. Alright, so, by 204 BC, Scipio had taken the war across the Mediterranean. He landed in North Africa. Now Carthage was in danger. This changed everything. For years, Hannibal had been the one bringing the war to Rome. Now Rome was bringing the war to Hannibal. Carthage needed its best commander. So Hannibal was called home. Imagine that moment. After years of fighting in Italy, Hannibal had to leave. He had spent more than a decade trying to break Rome. He had won some of the greatest battles of the ancient world. But he had never destroyed Rome. Now he had to return to Africa. And he knew what was waiting. Scipio. The Roman commander who had learned from Hannibal. The Roman commander who had defeated Carthaginian forces in Spain. The Roman commander who was now threatening Carthage itself. The two sides prepared for the final battle. Zama. And this time, Hannibal was fighting on Roman terms. He had elephants. He had soldiers. He had experience. But Scipio had studied him. He knew what Hannibal could do. And he prepared his army to deal with the elephants. The Roman soldiers created paths through their formation. Instead of letting the elephants smash into a solid wall, they gave them spaces to pass through. Roman troops attacked from the sides. The elephants became less useful. Then the cavalry became important. Scipio had support from Numidian cavalry. These horsemen played a major role. The battle was hard. But eventually, Hannibal was defeated. The man who had terrified Rome for years had finally lost. The war was over. Rome had won. But this was not just another Roman victory. This changed the Mediterranean forever. Carthage was forced to accept harsh peace terms. It lost much of its overseas power. It had to pay a huge amount of money. And it could not freely make war without Roman permission. Rome had survived its greatest challenge. And now it was becoming something much bigger. A Mediterranean superpower. So who really won? If we only look at individual battles, Hannibal looks incredible. He beat Rome again and again. Trebia. Lake Trasimene. Cannae. These were not small victories. They were disasters for Rome. Hannibal showed that Roman armies could be destroyed. He showed that Rome could be surprised. He showed that a smaller army could defeat a larger one. And he came closer than almost anyone else to breaking Rome during the Republic. But wars are not always decided by the greatest battlefield commander. Sometimes they are decided by the side that can keep going. And that was Rome. Rome could replace soldiers. Rome could raise new armies. Rome could rebuild after defeats. Rome could rely on its Italian allies. Rome could change its strategy. And when the moment came, Rome could take the war somewhere Hannibal did not want it. That is the biggest lesson of the Second Punic War. Hannibal could defeat Roman armies. But Rome could survive Hannibal. And that difference changed history. Look, there is also something else worth remembering. Hannibal was not fighting a weak Rome. Rome was already a major power. It had just conquered most of Italy. It had survived Pyrrhus. It had fought Carthage before. And it had learned from those wars. Hannibal attacked Rome at one of the strongest points in Roman history. And still, he nearly broke it. That tells you how dangerous he was. But it also tells you how strong Rome had become. The war lasted from 218 to 201 BC. 17 years. 17 years of fighting. Thousands upon thousands of deaths. Cities changing sides. Armies crossing mountains. Battles across Italy, Spain, Sicily, Greece, and North Africa. And at the end of it all, Rome stood stronger than before. Carthage was still alive. But its power had been badly damaged. Rome had learned something important. It could not simply win by having the biggest army. It needed better commanders. Better planning. Better alliances. And patience. Scipio had learned from Hannibal. And Rome had turned Hannibal's greatest strength against him. Hannibal wanted to bring the war into Italy. He did. He wanted Rome's allies to abandon Rome. Some did. He wanted Rome to collapse. It never did. And that is why Hannibal's story is so fascinating. He came incredibly close. But close was not enough. Because Rome could survive losing. That was its secret weapon. And honestly, that might be the most important thing about Rome's rise. Not that Rome always won. It didn't. Rome lost badly. Sometimes horribly. But every time Rome lost, it had another chance. Another army. Another commander. Another plan. Another year. And eventually, another victory. Pretty wild, right? So if you ask, Rome versus Hannibal, who would win? The answer is Rome. But that answer hides the real story. Hannibal may have been the better battlefield commander. Rome was the better survivor. And in a war this long, survival mattered more. Hannibal had crossed the Alps to destroy Rome. Instead, his invasion helped create the Roman power that would dominate the Mediterranean. The man who almost destroyed Rome ended up showing Rome exactly how dangerous the wider world could be. And Rome was never the same after him. Because after Carthage, Rome was no longer just the power of Italy. It was becoming the power of the Mediterranean. And that is where the story gets even bigger. Because Rome's next enemies would not just come from Italy or North Africa. Rome would now look toward Greece. Toward Macedonia. Toward Asia. And eventually, toward almost the entire known world. Hannibal had failed to stop Rome. But Rome was only getting started. Hannibal was gone, but Rome had a new target. Across the sea, another powerful kingdom was watching, its king had a strong army. And Rome was about to enter Greece. But why did Rome go to war? And who was really controlling the Mediterranean? Rome versus Macedonia. The war that took Rome beyond Italy. Watch the full story on Natioryx.